welcome everybody to your webinar this evening for early years and foundation stage. As Ellen has said, I'm Amanda Hornby and my background is in secondary schools actually. And when I decided to study, I did lots and lots of study to do with dyslexia. So I'm now a specialist dyslexia tutor. I can assess for access arrangements and diagnose dyslexia now. So lots of background information there. This is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about understanding dyslexia. We'll look at the indicators of dyslexia in very young children. We'll also look at the support in the classroom and at home before finally how the BDA can help. Before we go into that though, we'd like to do a poll. We'd like to see who our audience is. So Claudia, if you can pop the poll up. So you can choose, are you an educator? Are you a parent or carer? Are you both? Or are you joining us because you are an other in a different section? So just let me know who you are and we'll have a look at our poll in just a moment. So I'll just give it a second. Here we are. So we've got 68% who are educators. We've got 11% who are parents and carers. 16% are both, and other is 5%. Welcome everybody, regardless of who you are. Just going to move something on my screen so I can see my arrows. There we go. So let's have a look at dyslexia then. I want to give you an understanding of what dyslexia is, in case you really not quite understanding what it is. There's around about our UK population who are around about 10%, which are diagnosed with dyslexia. It equates to around about 6.5 million people. Depending on who you talk to, some might suggest it's up to 20% because there is a section of the population who are undiagnosed. It does affect both men and women, and there is a genetic link. So if you do suspect your child or somebody in your family, have a look at the wider family tree because there will be varying degrees of it around the family. But I want to start on a positive note, really. I just want you to have a look at all of these famous people. Here, these are thought to be dyslexic or neurodiverse. And the message here really is that dyslexia should never hold you back from being successful in whichever niche area that you want to go into. You know, whether regards you're going into sports or science or architecture, whether you want to go into politics or singer-songwriters or inventors, you know, there's lots and lots of people who have used their dyslexic thinking skills to be incredibly successful in whichever niche area that you want to go into. This gentleman is somebody in my local area. This is Father Martin. And he describes himself as very dyslexic. He explains that he had a very challenging childhood. He found out he was dyslexic when he was 9, but he had a really, really supportive family, and his brothers and sisters would really help him with his reading when he was a child. He was always never afraid to ask for help. And he found that he naturally had an ear for languages. And what he wanted to do was he specialised actually in sign language. So he now travels around the world delivering mass for people who are in the deaf communities around the world. And so he knows different languages in sign language, which is amazing. And so what he has done, he's used his own skills to be what he classes as successful. And, you know, when we look at the positives of being dyslexic, you might want to pick out some of these as a cluster in the people that you know or in your child in your family. So that ability to visualize, often with practical and problem solving skills, lateral thinking skills, being able to see the bigger picture. I go to quite a lot of organizations and they tell me that their dyslexic colleagues are very good in a team because there's always somebody who likes to look at the detail, but there's always that dyslexic thinker who looks at the whole thing and can see the flaws and the successes. So very good visual spatial awareness often, that creativity, that ability to think outside of the box. I noticed very good verbal communication in some of the students that I used to teach when they were in secondary school. And it was very often all the way from, the conversations, from the gossip that's in the playground to, politics and so, current affairs. But yet there was not a lot of words on the paper. And that to me was a big indicator. But they will also have high levels of motivation and persistence sometimes. And this is where the masking comes in. Very often, they don't want people to see how much they struggle. And so, very often they will put in a lot of effort to have the same kind of output as somebody else. So, there is lots of positives about being dyslexic. Some statistics I'd just like you to consider. This is about the messaging that we give to our young people. There is a general agreement that there is around about 30% of people who are dyslexic in our prisons, in the prison population. And that's a huge jump from 10%. Some might suggest it's up to 60%. And they call it the school to prison pipeline. Now, is that because of the messages that society is giving these young people? Because they are not fitting in with the education system. They have a different way of learning, and that is all it is. And yet, there is, our education system can be really quite rigid. On the other side of the scale, however, there's a huge number of people who are very successful because of their dyslexia, entrepreneurs particularly. And in fact, there is a survey done, and 40% of self-made millionaires were found to be dyslexic. And so they've been able to use that dyslexia, but it's remembering it's about the messages that they've received from those around them. Are they being told that, they won't amount to anything and they can't do anything? Or have they been told, actually, you can achieve, and regardless of the struggles that you have? And as educators and parents and carers, we have an opportunity to influence these statistics by giving these positive messages. I've got a video to show you in the next slide. I hope you enjoy it. I've not shown this one before. Tell me what you think.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to have a chat to you about dyslexia. Anyone be interested in having a dyslexic baby?
What the hell kind of a question is that?
The world's first dyslexic sperm bank. Open today.
Hello, good morning. What's brought you in today?
Just a bit intrigued, actually.
Tell me, what do you know about dyslexia?
I don't know, is that get jumbled up with writing?
In that disability?
You're kind of siphoned off and put in the special room.
A lot of people think that people with dyslexia are stupid. I've heard that word used a lot.
Given the choice, would you like your child to have dyslexia?
No.
I wouldn't kill it.
I have a restaurant.
Right.
My head chef is dyslexic.
Okay.
And there's certain things I just wouldn't give him to do at all.
Only 3% of people see dyslexia as anything other than a disadvantage. But look at the people around this room. Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple, inventor of the iPhone. Who's more of an icon for genius than Albert Einstein? We've got a whole catalogue here full of people who are or were dyslexic, like Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone. Dyslexics have a difference in their brains that makes them literally see the world a bit differently.
Got a lot of good-looking ones. Love. Slightly jealous.
Did you know that 40% of self-made millionaires are dyslexic?
Say that again.
What? That's amazing. It hasn't held any of them back. And
the value of these individuals and their contribution to all areas is just really encouraging.
And all of these dynamic achievers need to be given up as positive examples.
It does not need to be a barrier to achievement.
If you were thinking about how most people see dyslexia, what words do you think people would use to describe them?
At a disadvantage. But by the sounds of it, they're not.
So I hope you enjoyed that video. The message really is, if you're worried about your child, please don't be worried, because being dyslexic can actually be the thing that can make them very, very successful. Let's have a look at what happens in the brain. So it's very well documented, isn't it, that through child development studies, the more that we integrate with children from birth, the more that the brain develops. So let's have a look at the differences between a dyslexic and a non-dyslexic brain. The reading systems of the brain are on the left side of the brain. And we use these three areas when we are learning how to read. So we have the Broca's area, the parieto-temporal area, and the occipito-temporal area. And then we also have the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is responsible for making skills automatic, regardless of what skill it is. So it might be that your child is learning to walk. It might be that they are learning to ride a bike. As we get older, when we're learning to drive a car, for example, what happens is the cerebellum recognizes that there is activity in the brain. It starts to build the neural pathways, and imagine it's a bridge from both sides. It starts to build neural pathways. They will meet in the middle. They will fuse, and they will become completely automatic. And so you don't have to think about that skill anymore. When we think about reading, these for typical readers, these three areas of the brain, there is enough activity in the normal academic way of teaching to trigger these areas of the brain at the same time. The cerebellum recognizes that it's learning a new skill and it builds the neural pathways. And that skill of literacy acquisition, the reading and the writing, becomes completely automatic for them. When we think about dyslexics, however, there is less activity in the brain with these normal ways of teaching. Let's have a look first of all at when you send our children into nursery, they learn through play. And so they use all of their modalities, don't they? Their senses to learn. And then they start to learn to read. And then as they move up through the school, they use their multisensory way of learning much less. They're expected to sit still at a desk and to just listen. And what happens then, that's where the gaps start. Because with our dyslexic learners, what we need to do is to trigger these three areas of the brain independently so that the cerebellum can recognize the activity in the brain and to build the neural pathways. If they follow that normal academic way of learning, then there is less activity. And so we need to continue this multisensory way of teaching right the way through their education, all the way through primary, right the way through secondary and into adulthood and beyond. So a multisensory way of teaching is really, really important. And we'll come on to that a little bit later. Something else that they have a challenge with is their memory shelf. We all have a memory shelf at the front of our brains. Those who are non-dyslexic can probably hold up to about 7 or 8 books on their memory shelf without it becoming overloaded. Dyslexics, however, can only hold on to 2 or 3. If you add another one, then the first one will drop off. So they become overloaded very, very quickly. But books have different weights. If you give them lots of images, they are a lot lighter on the bookshelf and they can hold on to more before they become overloaded. Something like stress, however, will just wipe everything off. I used to see that in secondary school when I used to be in the classroom supporting my learners. They would be able to understand if I was talking to them. If they have a direct question from the teacher, all eyes are on them and they can't answer it. And the stress just wipes everything off their memory shelf. So bear that in mind as well. It's their memory that they may struggle with. They also have a challenge with information processing. So we know that the left side of the brain is for language, the right side is for that creative side. When we also have our filing cabinet of knowledge here behind our left ear. And if you're left brain dominant, you can find that information in your filing cabinet super fast, like milliseconds. And it's a bit like driving down a motorway with no other cars on. There's nothing to stop you and slow you down. If you're right brain dominant, however, there's a longer journey to take. And it's not to say that you're not going to find that information in that filing cabinet of knowledge. It just takes a little bit of time. So it might be that you notice the little ones shout something out that appears to be quite random, but really it's about something that they did maybe 20 or 30 minutes ago. And what has happened is they finally found that information, that answer or the idea. They've put it on their memory shelf and they need to capture it as quickly as possible. And because they're only little, they don't control that. They haven't got that control just yet. So they shout things out. So that is what is happening with their information processing. This all sounds quite negative, but in actual fact, there's some quite positives of being right brain dominant. They have unique benefits, often associated with creativity and that holistic thinking. So they're often very creative, they have very good intuition, they have quite an emotional awareness as they get older. Sometimes visual spatial skills, and that recognizes things like patterns and shapes, which is very useful in things like building. It might be that they're very into Lego building and so on, and so they can see that in that 3D. Very much holistic thinkers, they like to see the bigger picture, often quite flexible and adaptable as well. So let's have a look at what to be aware of in little children. Okay, so when you're observing, observe things like a difficulty learning nursery rhymes. The rhyming element of dyslexia is really difficult for them. It may be that you notice that they don't pay attention, they can't sit still. If they, find it difficult to listen to stories. It might be that they like listening to stories, but they show no interest in letters or words. And it might be because the words are moving around and they assume everybody sees the same. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. Difficulty learning to sing or to recite the alphabet. Now, the alphabet, we've got 26 letters, 44 sounds, and you've got a little one with a memory shelf that can only remember 2 or 3 things. And so it's bound to be really overwhelming for them. It might be that they have a history of slow speech development. Now, this might be to do with auditory processing. You may notice your little one asking pardon or what quite often. And that might not be to do with a hearing impairment. It might be because they're processing, they're trying to join the dots together with things that they are listening to. It might be because you're talking too fast and they have to ask you what or pardon so that they hear the same information again and join the dots and then be able to understand what it is that you're asking them to do. So this might, come into with muddling up words like cucumber or flutterby. It might be that they have that slow speech development. It could be because they can't connect what the sounds are to how they look on the page. And so there's a mismatch there. And that might be because they've not made the connection to how they make the sound in the mouth. Difficulty keeping a simple rhythm. If you've ever noticed during circle time when you've got the instruments out, are they just a beat out of everybody else? And is that because the processing, it's just ever so slightly slower than everybody else? Do they find it difficult to carry out 2 or more instructions at one time? Is it easy for them to listen to one instruction at a time? Do they forget familiar names of friends or teachers or colours? That's because of their memory shelf. They can't find it in their long-term memory, in their filing cabinet of knowledge, quick enough. excuse me, they may have that poor auditory discrimination, what I've just explained. A confusion between directional words up and down. Again, looking at the family history, the wider family tree, thinking about any kind of sequencing at all. Anything more than 2 or 3 in a sequence, it's going to cause a difficulty for them. And obvious good and bad days for no apparent reason, leading to poor behaviour. Now, this is because they're frustrated. They don't understand about themselves. They're not grown up enough yet to be able to reason with them and explain things. And so, the behaviour, the outside behaviour, just looks like they are being naughty. But in actual fact, it might be that they're really frustrated. They don't understand why they can't do something the same as everybody else, or that other people don't understand them and the reasons why they can't do it. We need to remember as well that the young brain is really still developing, and it's really trying to make sense of the emotions that they're experiencing. Remembering as well that the neural pathways are not yet fully developed, and so that erratic behavior is to be expected. But it's how you as a parent or a carer or an educator handles it that is really crucial to that developing brain. And that positive reinforcement of, and explanations of consequences are well documented in parenting skills. So I did say that I was going to mention this. This is a co-occurring difficulty called visual difficulties. You may also know it as Mears-Erlin syndrome, visual stress, scotopic sensitivity. Now, very small children don't realize what they see on a page might be different than everybody else, and consequently, their behaviors might be misunderstood. They may find it physically painful to look at a page of words. And this may happen if they experience anything like this. So these are some examples. Their behaviors might include an aversion to looking at a page or some text for very long. It might be that they're more interested in the images on the page rather than the text. It might be that they remember the story, but they are not able to follow the text. Look at things like rubbing their eyes, yawning a lot, and appearing very, very sleepy very quickly. If you notice anything like this, it's worth referring to a behavioural optometrist. I'm not sure whether I've said that absolutely correct. But if you go to an optician will tell you the health of the eyes. The behavioural optometrist will show you, they measure how the brain interprets what the eyes see. So there is a difference there. Depending on where you are in the country, I believe you might be able to get this through the NHS, so check with your GP. So this is an example of what they may see. So the swirling of the text. It might be that, if you say to them, do the words move, they might say no. But this is what they may see. And if you see these kind of rivers, you're not going to be able to pick out the beginnings and endings of where the sentences are. And so you're not going to be able to focus and decode efficiently. And so the way to help through that is to read through colour. So the visual distortions can be helped simply by using a coloured overlay, and it calms everything down on the page. It might be that they are prescribed specialist spectacles by the behavioural optometrist with different lenses. It might be that their eyes are fine, but they just need to read through colour. And as they grow, you have to remember as well that their brain is still developing, and so consequently their colour might change. If they use a computer, for example, you can read through a tint on a computer or a tablet. Other kind of indicators might include things like headaches, slow reading, poor comprehension skills, eye strain, all of these things. Now, it's important as well to point out that dyslexia is something that is separate from visual stress or visual difficulties. but it does often co-occur. So because somebody experiences this doesn't always mean that they're dyslexic, and the other way around as well. So it's important to point that out. There is a company that I know of called Crossbow Education that provides training and screening packs, and they can also provide. They sell things like the coloured pads and books that you can that the children can use. So let's have a look at what you can do in the classroom and at home. So, I love this Chinese proverb, tell me and I'll forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I'll understand. And so we need to remember to use these multisensory teaching techniques all the way through, and not just learning through play, but all the way through as they start to get a little bit older as well. And some people might say, well, what does it mean by being multisensory? Well, we take information in through different sensory channels. We call them modalities. There are a number of modalities that we use for learning. We use visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. And if we make sure that that multisensory approach is used with each piece of information that you're giving to the child, it means if you are giving them more than one way of holding on to that information, there are different layers to hooking on to that long-term memory. So the best thing to do is to link 2 or more modalities, and the more links we make, the stronger the message is going to be. So this diagram illustrates how different links can be made between different modalities. I've got another video on the next slide to give you an idea of the types of things that you can do with little ones in the early years and foundation stage.
A multisensory approach to learning involves the engagement of more than one sense at a time in order to teach concepts and skills. Through the simultaneous use of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic tactile pathways, a multisensory approach can enhance memory and ability to learn. All children benefit from exposure to multisensory activities when learning. This is particularly true for children who experience difficulties with learning or paying attention. Whether your child has special educational needs or not, when multiple senses are stimulated, information is more likely to be retained and integrated. As each child has a unique learning style governed by their most dominant sense, by using a multisensory approach to learning, you are likely to meet the individual needs of the child or group. It is important to note that children with sensory sensitivities might find a sensory-rich approach to be overwhelming and might therefore need accommodations in this regard. A multisensory approach to learning is interactive and fun, and as a result, most children are motivated to engage in this form of learning. When engaging in an enjoyable activity, the brain is more likely to retain information, and children are more likely to sustain attention to these activities due to their playful nature. Not all learning activities allow for all the sensory systems to be stimulated. However, it is possible to add at least one additional sense to each activity. Examples of multisensory approach to learning include the following: creating sequences with 3D textures, watching and listening how to complete origami tasks, sorting and matching colors using toys or blocks, rolling a dice and hopping to the right number, write letters and numbers in different textures, follow dance moves by listening to instructions, heads, shoulders, knees and toes, follow visual instructions for an obstacle course, molding Play-Doh into letters or numbers, jumping or swinging while reading words, numbers or sequences, memorizing words before hopping, skipping or crawling to a book to write these down, and reading information while recording this and then playing it back. Please note that this video is not intended to serve as therapy, and if you're concerned that your child may be struggling with some of the foundational skills mentioned in this video, it is important that advice be sought from a professional.
So I hope that gave you some ideas on the kinds of things that you can do with your little ones. I just want to go through some ideas as well that and some services of other service providers that might help you. If you know that you have somebody in your family or in your classroom who does need help with accessing text, there is a company called Guide Dogs, and they have a customize service. And basically what they can do is they can adapt any book to a particular colour, font, size, and so on. And that is any book at all. So for example, they might want to read the latest, I don't know, I'm out of touch with all the younger authors, the latest book that's hot off the press, and they feel that they want to read on blue paper, then you can ask the Guide Dogs customized service to adapt it for you. They charge just the same cost as the book, plus postage and packaging. So schools, if you are going to put an order in, put a bulk order in, and you just need to pay the one postage and packaging. So that's the Guide Dogs customize. Other things that you might want to think about is exposure to vocabulary, really rich and adventurous vocabulary. And one way to do that, if you find that they are reluctant to look at text, is to introduce them to the spoken word, audio books, videos, podcasts, all of those different things. You will still have that exposure to improve their vocabulary and their oracy skills. There's lots of things that you can see on the slide in front of you. Pardon me, we've got the RNIB Bookshare, and we've got things like Listening Books is another charity as well. But you can purchase particular books through Audible and so on. This is a really good read that I would recommend. This is somebody suggested this to me. It's a novel. It's called Fish in a Tree. Now, Linda Mullally Hunt writes from the perspective of the child, from a year 6 child, but it really helps you to understand how children behave and when they're struggling with their literacy. And it's a really brilliant read. And when I read this, when I looked back at some of the behaviours of the children that I helped in school and supported and taught, everything just fell into place. The behaviours fell into place. Thank you for the thumbs up. And it was a fantastic read. I would suggest everybody read it if you think that there is dyslexia within your family. This is another book that this is the only one that I can find that helps explain if somebody has that visual disturbance or visual difficulties. It's called Reading Through Colour, and it really helps to understand how colour filters reduce that reading difficulty. It goes into the science of it a little bit. This is another program that I've come across. It's called Code Breakers. This lady has actually just released a new book. It's called What If It's Not Dyslexia? And I've yet to get my hands on it because I believe it's a really good book to look at, to give you other ideas on other conditions as well. Code Breakers is a targeted intervention program. It can be used without specialist training, and I think that's the beauty of it, really. Another one that I know of is called Soft English. This is particularly for those who are English is their second language, but you also suspect that they could be dyslexic as well, which is very, very niche and it's very unique. So that is something to have a look at. Yeah, so but it goes right from the very beginning and all the way through to the end of primary. What Daniela suggests, who wrote Soft English, is that you take that child away from the normal curriculum and just teach them English to start off with, because otherwise, if you're only giving them maybe an hour a day, then they're still not going to be able to access the rest of the curriculum that you're exposing them to, and it's not quick enough. But I mean, that's might be something that you want to think about within your education organisation. So we just want to bring, before we open up the Q&A, how can the BDA help? So we are a charity, we're here for you. Our website is our greatest resource. If you need to, we have our accessibility function that you can use to help you with your reading it aloud. You can change the background, you can change the font, you can magnify it and so on. But there's a huge amount of information on there that would be really, really useful. You might also want to subscribe to our e-newsletter and our events. You know, we have quite a few free webinars that you'll be able to access. There's lots of other events on there as well. So have a look at the events page as well. We have a helpline that is open and operated by experts in the field. They are volunteers. So that's why we only have Monday to Thursday open. However, if you would prefer to, or you can't get to the phone during those times, we do have our email address and our socials as well. Please do get in touch. At the very least, we'll be able to signpost you to somebody in your local area, and you know, hopefully answer all of your questions. If you need an assessment for your little one, remember that assessments will only be able to take place once the child is 7 or 8. What you can do on our website is have a look for our checklist, our early years checklist. And that will be, you'll be able to go through that and talk through that as a probability of dyslexia. By the time the child gets to 7 or 8, then you might be able to apply to us via the website for a diagnostic assessment. And what we do is we have a bank of people all up and down the country who we know have got the correct qualifications, that they have the right insurance and so on and so on. There's quite a few criteria. But if you pop in your postcode and let us know where you are, we'll tell you who is the closest to you. So that is for assessments. If you're working in a school, you might want to consider the Dyslexia Friendly Quality Mark. It's a really positive statement to let prospective parents know that your school is a really good place for dyslexic learners. We have a framework of support and understanding with training for staff. And what being a quality mark holder means that the staff will be able to have the correct dyslexic support and the resources and the strategies for your child as well. And so it's likely in turn going to lead to greater levels of achievement for everybody. What else have we got? We've got training. So we have e-learning training, if that is what you prefer. We also do live virtual training, and all the way from fundamentals all the way up through to level 5 and level 7 is e-learning. Next week, I'm doing a Dyslexia Discovery Week. So that's a 4-day course, and you can inquire if you would be interested in doing something like that. So this is, there's lots of bespoke training that I can do face-to-face as well, or e-learning, whichever is preferable to yourself. And I think I've mentioned most of everything that we do. I'm just going to open it up now to questions and answers. So Claudia and Ellen, do you have any questions for me?
I do. I've got several questions here for you, Amanda. And thank you so much for me. You've had some really nice comments as well in the chat. I think people are finding it really helpful. I was wondering, we have a parent here thinking about getting a dyspraxia assessment for his son. He's in his last year of primary school, he's 10, and they've had a lot of feedback that he's working below standard for his year at each parents' evening. And they think this parent, she or he, might think that he might be dyslexic, but it gets brushed off and nothing is done. And this parent wants to find out how to get him help if he needs it. What would you recommend, Amanda, in that situation?
Definitely go for dyslexia assessment. The best way to do that is, go through the website, but the important thing is to have the right support in place, to find his strengths and challenges as well, and so be able to focus on the strengths. Um, you know, what I say to people who tell me that they're dyslexic, we have technology now to help us to remove those barriers to for literacy. Um, Use it to your advantage, but have that dyslexia diagnosis to look at your strengths and your challenges perfectly would be what I would definitely suggest.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And here's a practical one from Joanne. My daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia last year, and she's just started high school, and a lot of the work is online. How do you set the tint on the text just to help?
How do you set? You kind of broke up ever so slightly
Do
then,
you know?
Ellen.
Do you know how do you know how to set the tint on the text when you're online?
To change the text.
Change the tint of the text when you're online.
The tint. My mistake.
Yeah.
Sorry. Right. Okay. So there's a couple of downloads that you can have for free. There's one called SS Overlay, and the other one is called Color Veil. And they both do the same thing, but it's about finding one that is user friendly for you, which one you want. And literally all you need to do is to choose the color, and then every time that you turn your laptop on, you will be able to read through that color. It's really easy. If they're using a document, you can also, if you've got Microsoft, you can use the immersive reader function. You'll find that in the View tab, and what you can do then is you can change the background color, the font, have it read aloud. It will show you the syllable division. There's lots and lots of functionality. If you're on Google Docs, Text Help have got Read and Write. So download Read and Write app. Once you open that, you'll have a ribbon, and you can do the same kind of things. So there's lots and lots of things that you can do. You can either change the color of the document or read through a tint.
Okay, thank you so much, Amanda. We're getting lots of questions now. Here is one question around behaviour. How do you diffuse a situation with a child who might be very frustrated and kind of help him understand the situation they might be going through without adding to that memory shelf that you were talking to us about?
It would be helpful to know how old the child is. However, just tell them that you understand, really. If you can see that they're getting overloaded, talk very slowly to them. Give them one instruction at a time and see how that goes. What I always found as well was lots of eye contact and nodding of the head and smiles. So lots of positive non-verbal cues as well. And that will also bring hopefully the frustration down. By understanding what the frustration is, remembering as well that these little children can't always tell you. It's about unpicking the behaviors, isn't it? So if you do have something that is frustrating, try and take a couple of steps back to work out what it was that has created that situation. If you're talking too fast to somebody who's little and they can't understand you, slow right down. That kind of thing, really. It's about observing the child, but also observing you and finding out what are you doing wrong.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I think that's a really common. I think parents, carers, and teachers will really recognise that child getting frustrated with themselves and how to help them sort of diffuse that situation. Got a question here around if you're in a very diverse and multicultural early years setting or an EYFS setting, how do you identify early students with maybe where English is an additional language, but there might be additional language barriers, or how do you address that, and how do you help assess the child, whether it's that they might be developing a bit slower because they might be speaking 3 languages, which can delay children's development a little bit, or is it a challenge for them in terms of reading and literacy? Can you speak a little bit to that?
It is a challenge. One thing that you will notice is if once you observe a child who's learning the English as a language, very often over time, the spoken language can become quite good, quite articulate, and yet the written language would still be very, very, very basic. And that's where you can see that there starts to be a gap. Take it back, try and go when you're teaching the beginnings of literacy, use that multi-sensory way of teaching a lot. There is the BDA have got teaching dyslexic students. It's a book, and that gives you lots of practical ideas on, oh, excuse me, things like reading card routines and writing card routines and things like that. And it is a lot of quite a slow process. However, if you invest that time early on, then you really are going to get the gains at a later date. So first of all, observe if there is a gap between the spoken and the written. If so, take a few steps back and make it multisensory.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I think we've had a question that kind of relates to that, which is similar, but it's not related to sort of English as a second language or maybe being bilingual. How do you distinguish, and it might be that it's around the age of the child that this matters, but how do you distinguish between kind of normal literacy difficulties of finding it hard, slower development, and dyslexia?
It is difficult. But I think what you'll need to do as well is look as well at their frustrations. There was one, I'll give you one example. There was one young man that I observed. He was too little for a diagnosis of dyslexia, but I put him under quite a lot of pressure to try and read and to read from a screen and so on. And he's because I'd put him under pressure deliberately, I then observed his behaviors, and he went outside and he started almost growling because he didn't have the words. He wasn't articulate enough to be able to express how he was feeling, and so he started to growl. That was picked up by somebody else who was working with him as possibly autistic. Yeah, it could be, or it might be a bit of autism because that communication challenge. But when I sat and really observed him, it was almost like he had visual difficulties. He wasn't able to look at the page. So it wasn't that he wasn't intelligent enough to be able to pick up and decode the actual, how to read and how to write, but because he was showing these very, very subliminal signs of visual difficulties. And then, of course, it leads on to different behaviors. And so it is very difficult to distinguish. However, if you know what you're looking for with dyslexia, you'll be able to pick those out. And it's all of these things that we've talked about: that slower processing speed, that memory, the things like rhyming is difficult for them. Giving them things like 3 words, cat, hat, and pot. Which one is the odd one out? That kind of thing. If they're struggling to find the odd one out, that is one of the signs of dyslexia, really. So it's looking very, very intricately at the signs of the behaviour and how they are performing as well. It's not a straightforward answer, I'm afraid. It is quite complex.
Yeah, thank you so much. We have a question here around if a child has experienced visual stress, but it has gone unrecognised into their teens, can that cause permanent literacy difficulties? Or is that not how it works? And kind of, can that cause dyslexia, or is that separate from dyslexia?
Yeah, so visual difficulty is separate from dyslexia, but it does co-occur quite a lot, which is why I've mentioned it. So what was it? Because you broke up ever so slightly again, Ellen.
Sorry.
Was the question, how does that, can they,
I think the
ask
person's
it to me again.
I think the person, if a child has experienced visual stress, but this has gone unrecognized and they're now in their teens, can that cause permanent difficulties with literacy and can that cause dyslexia, or is that not how it works?
It might be a delay. Because obviously, if they've not been able to decode because the words have been moving around, they will be a little bit behind. The beauty of understanding that it's visual difficulties is that once they are able then to read through colour, the rate of reading will improve. So their fluency will improve. They will have less mistakes. They'll be able to comprehend a little bit easier. So it's not like it will do any damage, but it might be that they need to just once they can read something really fluently and at speed, they'll be able to start to catch up a little bit then.
Thank you. And here we have some questions around kind of diagnosing and assessing for dyslexia. How long does an assessment take? How much does it cost roughly? And also, which professional can give a diagnosis of dyslexia in the UK?
First of all, it's not available on the NHS because it's not a medical diagnosis, it's an educational diagnosis. So you will need to be able to have a diagnosis from a specialist assessor or an educational psychologist. Roughly, it varies up and down the country, really. Anything from £300 or £400 up to 700 or 800. Educational psychologists, I believe, charge a little bit more. So it does depend on where you are as well. What was the first part of that question, Ellen? I've forgotten it.
How long does it take to do an assessment?
Oh, yeah. So again, this is driven by the individual as well. Sometimes, if they're feeling incredibly overwhelmed, you may need to split it into small chunks. Generally, it might take 3 or 4 hours. But again, depending on how many breaks that individual might need, it's normally all done in one day, and then you'll be able to get a full report maybe a week or two later. It's important as well to point out if you do ask for an assessment, the background information is just as important as the actual test themselves, because the background information will really give the assessor some proper information about the education, the family background, any opportunities that have been given to the child, and so on. And so it's about making sure that you do provide a full background information so that they can make a real a diagnosis with all of the information that is required.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And that's always really important, is that you have full kind of history of the child or the young person, or indeed the adult. That's really, really helpful. Thank you so much for that, Amanda. I'm going to draw it to a close here. We didn't have time to answer all the questions, but we'll try and get back to you if we haven't. If there are any questions that were unanswered, you can always email all of us as well. But I hope you found this session really useful. I always learn something new, Amanda, when I go to your sessions as well. So that's really great. Thank you for that. As I mentioned, we have more free webinars that might interest you over the coming weeks. The next in this particular series is for primary school age children. That's on the 5th of November. 5th of November. Remember. And we're also running around one for secondary school children on the 18th of November. And there's lots more events, lots more of those on the events section of our website, so you can look at. And they're all free. All you need to do is register, as you did for tonight's webinar. As I said, we'll have slides coming around with a recording of the webinar as well. But we'd also be very, very grateful if you would fill in the feedback form, which I think is that link below. Is that correct, Claudia? No.
No, I've put the wrong link on my slide.
We'll have our feedback link. We're really grateful. Feel free to be harsh, but then we learn and we improve for you. So please do tell us how we can make it better for you. But really, really, thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you so much, Claudia. And thanks all of you for coming today. It's been really great. Thank you for your time and have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.